So we have now described something about the identification of the chilazon, and the word for this color in we call purple. The color of the argaman is actually taken from the Greek word porphyra, and porphyra refers in Greek to mollusks that yield the dyes. And from those that yield dyes, the ancients divided into two separate categories. One of tchelet, and another one was argaman. And in English, that is hyacinth purple, that's tchelet, and Tyrian purple, which is the color of the argaman. Hyacinth purple is the tchelet, and Tyrian purple is the argaman. The interesting thing about the tchelet is this was one of the most important industries and most lucrative industries in antiquity, and it had no unique connection with Jewish tradition or biblical requirements at all. And this we know from all the ancient literature, the archaeological finds, and comparing languages. But even in our own book of Yechezkel, the prophet Yechezkel, in chapter 27, he describes how Tchelet and Argaman were part of international traveling and wasn't something specifically Jewish. And there it says, I'll say it in English, Haran and Caneh and Eden, the traffickers of Sheba, Assyria, and Media were your traffickers. They were your traffickers with adornments, with wraps of tchelet, international trade. And the previous verse says there, linen with embroidery from Egypt was your sail, the sail of your Israeli boats, to be to you for a staff. Tchelet and argaman from the isles of Elisha was your covering. And so we see that all the information from the ancient world regarding this industry of tchelet was common to them, to the world, and to Israel. And therefore, from that, we can learn all these details, specific details about our tchelet, which we're interested in. Let me now go to the second question, the color of tchelet. This has always been a big issue and a thing of great interest. In order to understand this subject, it's important to understand, in order to know that in the ancient world, there was no abstract concept of color. In our case, tchelet and argaman were not colors at all, but they are commodities dyed with wool. Wool dyed to certain colors, in this case with chelzonot, with shellfish, and in the case of tolat shani, with the Kermes insect. So you may say to me, how do I know that these are not the names for colors? Well, that's simple. We know that these materials are mentioned in the Bible, in the book of Shemot, and there is part of a verse which lists those materials which were used in building the Mishkan. And there it says, Zahav, V'chesef, V'nechoshet, Tchelet, Argaman, V'tolat Shani, V'shesh. Now here the verse starts off with the gold, the Zahav, and then the silver, and then the copper, the Nechoshet. Are these referring just to the color of gold? The color of silver? Of course not. Everyone knows and realizes also from the continued use of the word that gold is referring to the metal gold. Similarly, silver metal, and similarly to the copper, the Nechoshet. And similarly, the rest of the verse continues, Tchelet, Argaman, Tolat Shani, they are dyed wools, they are commodities, and not just abstract colors. So we've reached a point where we see that in antiquity, but what is called in our Bible tchelet was understood in the language of the time mainly as hyacinth purple, and this gives us, I think, the most important pointer to what color we are talking about, because the hyacinth purple and the wild hyacinth. The wild hyacinth is a flower which everyone should be able to see. And if you don't have one where you live, you can find it in the internet, and you can see what a beautiful, radiant blue this flower has. But however, in the shellfish which we're talking about, with the chilazon of the tchelet, there is no color at all. Only in a certain gland of the chilazon there is a colorless precursor, which is removed, as we saw in the video, and taken through two stages. The first one is formation of the dye stuff, which you didn't see so clearly in the video, followed by the second stage of dyeing. Now, what about the formation of a dye from the colorless precursors, which are actually extracted into hot water from the body of the snails? First of all, no illumination, no sunlight is required for this first stage to form the tchelet dye stuff. But if you, instead of taking many dye fish, as you saw in the video, many chelazonot, not if you take many of them and you gather them together, as you saw in the video, you'll notice that the color that you get is the color of violet, as you saw in the video. But if you take individual shellfish one at a time and take the color, the small amount of color from each one, then the color varies. Some of them give blue, and some of them give shades of purple. And this is a subject which is not still understood and has not been researched. Finally, attempts have been made to understand what's different between one chilazon and the other. That gives, some of them give blue and some of them give purple. Of course, this is due to different proportions of the between the amounts of the three constituents of the violet monobromo indigo, which you saw in the video, the purple dibromo indigo, and the blue indigotine. But why there should be difference between one snail and another is still not known, and this is a real challenge for us. So what we receive from the shellfish, as you saw in the video, is a color which is violet, and violet appears to be inappropriate because we expect, as the video showed, we expect to have a blue color. So we went. The process was use of a photochemical breakdown, which was applied during stage 2 of the dyeing, and that decomposes, as you saw in the video, the two bromo indigos, converting all the color stuff to blue indigo itself, as you saw in the video. But this process, which you saw quite clearly demonstrated in the video, raises certain issues. The first one is in antiquity there was no illumination during the dyeing process. They didn't conduct the dyeing in glass vessels, as you saw in the video, but in clay or rock vessels, and these vessels were covered during the time that the dye was developed. So the debromination, which you saw in the video, couldn't have been carried out in antiquity. Second of all, as you saw, and the essential part of the process of debromination, which you saw, is the use of a very strong chemical, dithionite. But this is a modern artificial chemical reagent that did not exist in antiquity. A third issue is that if you would apply this debromination reaction to argaman, to pure bromo indigo, you get all of it converted to indigo. Because of this, all of the shellfish, those of tchelet and those of argaman, would all give the same blue color, and therefore you would have no chilazon, which was specific for tchelet, and this obviously is not what we understand from the way it's described in the Talmud in particular, and in the Maimonides, that there was a specific chilazon, hachilazon, which was used only for making tchelet. And not only that, but there was also in the Talmud, copied by the Rambam in this halakha, that there was an analytical test performed in antiquity by our ancestors, which could distinguish between tchelet on the one hand and a forged blue dye called kala ilan, which is considered to be indigo itself. Now, these two materials are the same. The indigo formed from the chilazon that we saw in the video, and the blue indigo, which you receive from Kala Ilan, they're the same chemical material, and therefore, in an analytical test, as described in the Talmud and in Maimonides, they would be distinguished. But if we have all of the bromo indigo converted into indigo, there would be no difference, and therefore it wouldn't stand up to the analytical test written in the Bible. And finally, I'd like to mention, why bother to go through such an arduous process of fishing and changing all the chemistry in order to produce this indigo when it's readily available as Kala Ilan. And so therefore there are so many doubts. There's Safek, and there's another Safek, Safeka. And therefore there's a real problem here of how we can really believe that this product, this debromination product, was used in antiquity. So now that's the bad news I'm bringing to you. But of course, there is good news going with it, and that's why I'm here, in order to tell you that if we take the violet color, the dye or the dyed wool, as produced directly from the chilazon on mild heating to 60 or 80 degrees, the violet color changes spontaneously to blue in a thermochromic transition, it's called by chemists, and there's no change in molecular structure or molecular composition that you saw demonstrated to you by the formulae in the video. This process of just heating is non-destructive, as I said. No chemical change. It's irreversible. And so why does it happen? Well, how can the color change without any chemical change? This has been researched by leading chemists in recent year or two, and it's been proved that the change in color is only due to a decrease in the particle size of the dye stuff dyed in the wool or in the pure dye itself. So conversion of initial violet tchelet to indigo is unnecessary, and it would be good if we could utilize this new knowledge of replacing the debromination process with a thermochromic transition without any change in the material which we're using.